What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Awkward Dadcast. I am your host and resident Awkward Dad, John. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for tuning in. This is going to be a little bit of a reintroduction video because I have done previous episodes of the Awkward Dadcast, but it's been almost 2 years. I haven't recorded since mid-2022. So it's been almost 2 years, and a lot has happened. A lot of life has happened, and I just got super busy. Things happen. But I'm back. So I wanted to reintroduce myself and talk about who I am. So I'm a husband and a father of 7 children. 2 of those children have special needs. My oldest son, who's 15, he has severe autism. My 5-year-old daughter has Down syndrome. And my other 5 children are neurotypical. So I wanted to talk about just life with kids like that, our experience, our journey. My oldest has had a really rough journey. He is not able to live with us right now. He's living in a state-supported living center. So we are walking that road, and that's a unique road. And I hope to be able to speak to some people about that. The purpose of this podcast is to reach out and hopefully touch people with my story, with our story, reach dads mainly. My wife has started to talk more about our journey with our severely autistic son, and she has gotten quite a lot of feedback, especially from moms who are walking the same road. And she has really inspired me. She's gotten so much traffic on social media, so many people reaching out to her. She's reached so many moms. She has a support group here local for moms, and I thought, you know what, there are dads out there who are struggling with this road and this path in silence. You don't hear from dads. You don't really see a whole lot of dads reaching out, things like that. So I really, really hope to encourage dads, but everybody really. People don't usually talk about severe and profound autism. It's just not a thing that is very glorious to talk about. People are starting to. I'm seeing more and more people on social media talk about that and their struggles, but it's just not a thing that's super comfortable to talk about. So I'm hoping to, on this podcast, give my personal perspective, give my story, have guests on, have interviews, and just, do the whole gamut of that. So I guess really I want to talk about my story. So that starts in 2008 when my wife and I found out that she was pregnant with our firstborn. We were super excited. We had no idea about having kids. And her pregnancy was pretty rough. She was sick most every day during her pregnancy, and we were traveling about 6 weeks before her due date, and her water broke. We had the baby early. He was premature. He ended up being in the NICU for 11 days. He had just some issues. He had jaundice. He had a little bit of a breathing issue. When they're that small and they're born early, just things haven't quite developed yet. So he was in the NICU. We were about 5.5 hours from home. So that was a shock. We didn't have any baby clothes, all that. And so his birth was a little bit traumatic, and we were scared and didn't know what to do. We brought him home, and he was so tiny, and we just raised him. My wife had started to notice some things about him early on, just him not meeting some milestones, things that kids his age usually did. He wasn't making eye contact well. He wasn't responding to vocal cues and things like that. There were some different things. And so she got a hold of the early childhood intervention people, and they came into the picture, and they did some assessments and things, and they told us, yes, he's definitely got some cognitive delay, some other delays too. So we were taken aback by that. But honestly, since he was our firstborn, we didn't really have a lot to compare him to. So we didn't really think he was much different from any normal child. But when he was 17 months old is when he got a diagnosis of PDD-NOS, which stands for Pervasive Developmental Disorder Not Otherwise Specified. And the doctor told us this is a bit of a pre-diagnosis for autism. We don't diagnose kids that young with autism, but that's what direction we think he's going. We think that he'll have a diagnosis of autism. And I was really taken aback by that. I didn't really know what that meant, and I was a bit in denial. And I remember asking the doctor if he would grow out of it. I said, he'll get better, right? And I remember her looking down at the floor and not really looking very hopeful of that. And she said, maybe, he might, but she didn't seem very hopeful about that. So we just continued raising him. He was a very, very busy, very, very active child. He didn't respond to his name. In fact, he seemed to be scared and run away when we would call his name. He didn't make eye contact well. He was pretty moody. He didn't play with things appropriately. He could sit for hours in front of a screen. He was a bit of an elopement risk. He would try to run out the door and run away from us in public places, and he was just generally hard to handle. Speech was not developing, but of course we didn't really realize how bad that was because, like I said, he was our firstborn. We didn't really have a lot to compare him to. In 2011, my second child was born. So we added another child. Things get harder. My oldest son, Jude, is his name. He was in school at that time. He was 3 years old, and so he was able to enroll in school because of his diagnosis. They were having trouble with him at school every day. He wouldn't sit down, pay attention. He was just very busy, not taking orders, things like that. Life was becoming very hard with him. Church was becoming very hard. We are Christians. We are believers. And at that point, my wife was on staff at a church. We led worship. She was a worship leader. I played the guitar. So every Sunday we were serving in church. And so that means longer Sundays. We show up early for band rehearsal, sound check, whatever, and we leave later because we're getting together our gear. And so that meant longer times for the kids in childcare, and he was not handling it well. There were just times when he was too hard to handle for them. They would have to come get us. He was just causing trouble, hard to handle. So that's a lot of the reasons that families with kids with autism just don't go to church, because things are so hard. These kids don't sit still. They don't listen well. They're always on the move. They're super energetic. They're trying to run off. And so church had become very hard, and church was a big part of our life. And really, I want to talk now about some of the losses that you experience as a parent of a child with autism. And, it's oftentimes glossed over. People don't really talk about it that much because really there's been so much autism awareness in this country, which has been really, really great. It's created a lot more acceptance, a lot more understanding. I would say most everybody, at least in our country, knows what autism is. You know somebody with autism. We understand it very well. So autism awareness has been great, but at the same time, I feel like it's created a little bit of a tougher atmosphere for people to talk about the negative aspects of autism. There's a lot of the sentiment of autism is my superpower. Things like that have really highlighted a lot of the positives of people with autism: hypercreativity, just thinking outside the box, being able to see things that neurotypical people don't really see. But it makes it kind of hard to talk about the negative aspects because people don't want to hear negative aspects about children, right? And about things going on with them. Babies not making their milestones quickly turns into huge gaps in development between autistic kids and their peers. And you start to notice, oh wow, my son, my daughter, they're way behind. Your child gets to 5 years old and you're around a class of kindergartners and you realize, oh wow, he should be speaking at this level. He should be doing more. He gets a little older, it gets wider. Kids start playing sports. Kids start doing more and more articulate type things. And so there's a definite loss there. And you can say, well, you shouldn't have any expectations for your child, but everybody has expectations for their child. Whenever they're pregnant, whenever you think about having kids, you naturally have expectations for your children. And when that's taken away, it's very hard. There's a mourning process there. There's a grief process there. There's a famous poem probably a lot of you are familiar with. I think it's called Welcome to Holland, right? The whole thing about, comparing, expecting a child to a vacation in France. And so when you think you're headed to France, you're excited, you're going to go to France, you've been thinking about it, you've been planning for it. But whenever you get off the plane, you're in Holland. So basically, not to mansplain this, as my wife says, but when you show up, it's different. When you have a child with, and that poem was written mainly about Down syndrome, people with Down syndrome. But the thing is, they're saying, well, it's different, but it's not worse. Don't you love Holland? Holland's beautiful. There's many things to see in Holland. Just because you're not in France, right? Just because you don't have a neurotypical child doesn't mean that you're going to have a bad experience. Holland's great, right? I don't really know if it translates with autism quite that well, but with severe and profound autism, it definitely does not. And so, we've all heard about that poem, but the diagnosis of anything severe, honestly, is heartbreaking. It really is. Jude was diagnosed with level 3 severe autism, and at the time, we had no idea what that meant. I can't even really remember how old he was when he got that diagnosis, but definitely older than 17 months. But it's heartbreaking, and also it's very difficult. He was just hard to handle. And about 2012, we started to realize that we needed to move back closer to home where we grew up, where our parents were, because we needed help. We needed support. So we moved back home. We had been living in West Texas, about 8 hours away. We decided to move back closer to family, and so we were trying to find a house. And in the meantime, we moved in with my in-laws, and they were letting us live there. And they were so great, so supportive, so helpful. While we tried to find a house, we ended up deciding to build a house, and that took about 2.5 years because we were doing that in cash and doing a lot of the labor ourselves. And our son Jude was just getting more and more difficult to handle. He was just busy. He was always active, never sitting down. He would be moody. When he was in a bad mood or didn't get what he wanted or something upset him, he would tear things up. He would destroy the house. He would break things. He would knock things off of the table or off of shelves or do something destructive. He had sensitivity to sound, sensitivity to media, things on the TV, and that was especially challenging because it seemed like he would have a reaction later. It would be a delayed reaction to whatever stimuli was overwhelming to him. Like we'd watch a movie and he seemed to be fine, and then he'd be super upset later, tearing things up. We're like, what's going on? We finally figured out he was having a delayed response to being overstimulated. So just super hard to figure out all of those things. He broke a couple of TVs in my in-laws' house, and we would replace it, and he broke the next one. So it was just hard. And on top of that, he was at an elopement risk. So he was very fast, super fast. If you know some of how these kids are, even at 6, 7, 8 years old, he was just super strong and super fast. And I don't think he was any stronger than any other child, but when a kid like that is doing something, giving you a hard time, fighting you, whatever, they're giving it their all, right? They're giving you 100% of their energy, and he was just super strong. I would have to be right on him. At this point in his life, I would have to be just right on him. We had to have him in view at all times because he would run off. And he didn't respond to his name. We didn't know if he would come back. I oftentimes said, if we just let Jude go, where would he go? I mean, I have no idea. If we could somehow have a controlled environment where people were watching him or, watching him from afar, ready to keep him out of danger, where would he go? And we have no idea. But he would just get up out of his chair, like in the kitchen. He would get up off of a stool or a chair and just run out the door. And I would have to be right there on him because he would go to neighbors' houses. He would get into their things. It was very, very difficult. We decided to have more children at that time. That's a controversial topic. So many people have challenging kids, and they're obviously worried about having more, and they say, man, we're done. We don't want to do this again. We had worries. We thought if we had to have another child with severe autism, it's going to be impossible. But we just really trusted God in that, and we felt like God was saying, you're not done having kids. So in 2014, we had our third child. At the end of 2015, we had our fourth child. Jude was getting harder and harder to handle Jude. My wife would have a baby, and she would naturally be taking care of the baby, and that would just, I would be on Jude, right? She can't take care of a baby and a child with severe autism, so it pretty much drove us to stay at home. I always had to have my eyes on him. It made gatherings, social gatherings, family gatherings, holidays, very, very difficult. There was no way to enjoy a gathering with a family or friends because I always had to have my eyes on him. I was never able to just show up to a place, have a conversation with somebody there, because I would have to be right on him. He was so active, running around. Sometimes I would try to start a conversation and then just have to leave. I mean, there's no waiting. There's no waiting for somebody to finish their thought and saying, "Oh, excuse me, let me go check on my son." It's just I run off. And so it's very, very hard, the whole social aspect of that. It's getting hard to carry on like things aren't really wrong. My son had become violent. His aggression and violence was really, thankfully, aimed at me and not my wife, not my other kids, but we always worried about that. But I would always have scratch marks, bite marks. He would hit, he would kick. I would have scratches on my neck, on my face. My arms were just full of scratches, old scratches, new wounds, all those things. My arms would be, actively bleeding a lot of times. And I mean, that's like that's like the elephant in the room, right? Like you show up to a place, show up to work, and there's a big scar on your neck, and people are like, "Hey, there's that. What happened?" And so, people are well-meaning. People, I had somebody ask me one time if the cat scratched me, and it's just funny, but inside you're going, no, my kid did this. And how do you say that without making everybody feel, oh my gosh, I'm sorry I brought that up. But it was just getting harder to ignore those things and live with them. But another thing was work became very hard for me. As he got more and more difficult to handle, I was having to be home more. My wife was not able to take care of him without me very much. I had been working a job that there was some travel involved. There was some last-minute travel sometimes involved, a lot of overtime, things like that. And some of that was unpredictable overtime. And that just got so impossible because my wife would just be like, hey, we're having a hard time. I mean, it's after school. When are you going to be home? And I could just be like, I have no idea, And so it affected my work. I had to change jobs a couple of times, and I ended up going to work at his school because we were just getting so many calls from the school, and somebody would need to go up there. At that time, that was what was written in his, whatever behavior intervention plan, whatever they call that. Call the parents. Somebody needs to come pick him up. And so, of course, along the way, we realized Texas law doesn't really. You don't really have to go do that. The school is really bound by law to give him a free and appropriate education. So, but in order to be around and be able to show up quick to even calm him down so he could finish his day, I got a job at the school, and I was able to be close. But there are also things like holidays, spring break, summer break, and those were huge challenges. I remember getting to the point that I hated holidays so badly, even down to an early release day, like an early release Friday. If there's a holiday on Monday, oftentimes the school would do an early release on Friday. And I just dreaded that so bad because mainly Jude liked being in school. He liked the routine. He liked what he had going there. He liked knowing Monday through Friday I'll be at school. Even weekends were hard, but we could tell him, hey man, Monday you're going to go back to school. So holidays, I dreaded holidays. One summer in, this was 2015, I was at work and I got a call. My wife called me and said, we're at Walmart, and this is a town about 15 minutes away from where I worked. We're in Walmart and Jude escaped my care. Jude is lost. And that was terrifying. That was terrifying. Jude was 6 years old at that time, and that was our worst nightmare. At that point, we did have some government assistance to be able to pay an attendant to be at the house and help out with him. Jude was able to create a diversion. He spilled some dry spaghetti noodles, and my wife instinctively went down to pick them up. So did the attendant. They went down to go gather them all up. Jude jumps out of the shopping cart and runs down at the end of the aisle, and before the attendant can notice, he's already exited the aisle and he's already turned, and they didn't see which way he turned. So at that point, he's got a big head start on them. So they start looking. He's lost for 10 or 15 minutes. He ended up leaving the store and going across the big Walmart Supercenter parking lot and, traversing through cars, traffic, all that good stuff. And he went to a restaurant. There was a Chick-fil-A that was adjoined to the parking lot. He went into Chick-fil-A unnoticed and was able to go in the play place and all that. I really don't know how much time he spent in there. But I just remember driving. I jumped in a school vehicle and just because I was on site working on something, and I just took off and started towards our town, thinking the worst, thinking he's been hit by a car, he's run away, he's going to die in a ditch, he's going to get kidnapped, something like that. It was our worst nightmare. But he was found, and it just seemed like God orchestrated the people to be at the Chick-fil-A that were there. There was a whole team of EMT and firefighters, first responders. They were there. There was a local pastor who we knew who was there, and there was a lady that we knew who teaches early childhood development at a local university. And so all of these people who are great with kids and who know how kids are supposed to act, once he was noticed, some of them recognized him. But the EMT guys, they were able to hold on to him and find out whose kid he was, and we ended up finding him. But that was our worst nightmare. He was 6 years old. Another time, a couple of years later, my wife was pregnant again, and he got away from her at our church. And our church at that time was meeting in a convention center, which was on Highway 59. And if you know Texas and you know Highway 59, you know that's a very busy highway. Major freight, 18-wheeler path. And he just didn't seem to understand danger and know that he was in danger. And he got to Highway 59. My wife couldn't run fast enough to catch him. She shouldn't have been running anyway. But once I heard about it and I was able to take off and go after him, he had already been in the highway, weaving in between cars, 18-wheelers. I saw him. We both saw him. We thought we were going to watch him die. And I wasn't able to get to him before he actually exited the highway and came back into the parking lot, and I was able to grab him. And he was laughing, And so this is the kind of thing that we lived with. The confusing behavior, the confusing, like he was laughing, right? Just not knowing, what is he thinking? Does he understand any danger? Why is he laughing, right? Just all of these things. There were so many emotions. Our life was just being held hostage by severe autism. Around that time, he was still being very difficult, but it had gotten to the point where I couldn't even get restful sleep, because once he got to sleep, he did sleep through the night, which I was thankful for. But there would be a random times he'd wake up in the middle of the night and just be wired, right? And wasn't going back to sleep. And so somebody would have to be up with him, because we didn't know what he was going to do. He was at the point where we were hiding knives hiding things like scissors. We didn't know if he might, hurt somebody with them. So I was always on edge. Whenever he got home from school, I had to be home basically. And I was watching him like a hawk. I had to be on him at all times. And at night, you just never get to a restful sleep. Now, I've heard that happens anyway when you have children, that you don't ever sleep super well because you're ready to jump up and go help one if they need you. But this was just a tortured state, honestly. And so, honestly, Jude was tortured too. This didn't just affect us. I hated this for Jude so badly because his verbal skills were not great. He had a hard time expressing to us things that he needed, things that he wanted. And his mood was just up and down. He had OCD tendencies where he just would have to do things. He would have to touch things a certain way. He would have to do, like whatever came to his mind, he would just have to do it. Or else it was like it was the end of the world to him. He was tortured. At this point, we had been going down the medication path for quite a while, and that's another sad path, because some of these meds that they'll put your kids on are heavy-duty meds. They are psychotropic medications that really nobody should be on. They're hard on your system. They're hard on your organs. And it's just a difficult journey because some of these medications, they take weeks before you're supposed to be able to see a difference, see a change. And so you would start the medication and you would think, okay, they said 4 weeks before we see any change. Okay, so you're waiting 4 weeks, but at the end of 1 week, you start to see a change and you start to see something different, and you go, okay, is this the medication? Wow, this could be great, right? And so you get a false hope. But it turns out that was just a couple of good days. And so things crash again and you're going, oh my gosh, well, what's going on? And then 4 weeks comes and you're thinking, okay, he's doing a little bit better. Is this the medication, or is this just a good day? And there's the up and down with that, right? And then maybe it's something that you have to wean him off of. It's something that won't just, you can't just stop cold turkey, right? Or then maybe there's another med introduced because maybe he's got, maybe one's for mood and then another one is for OCD behaviors, and then maybe another one is for something else, aggression. And so he's on 3 heavy-duty meds, and they have all got terrible side effects. And we're told to, keep an eye on him. One could have an effect on his heart, things like that. And then you still go, okay, is there a difference? And if there is a difference, you're wondering which medication is it? Is it the one for mood, or is it the one supposedly supposed to stop the aggression? It's just a nightmare. It's a nightmare that nobody should go through with a child. We've had to call the ambulance before because one of these medications just dropped his blood pressure like just to dangerously low levels, and he had to go to the ER to get checked out and things like that. It's a trial and error thing. There are so many parents out there that are just so exhausted with the med journey, and there's meds that they say you can't be on this for long term because it'll cause this long-lasting, lifelong side effect. Oh, wow. Okay, we can't do that. So we have some time, maybe. there was a medication that worked really well for him called risperidone or Risperdal, but long term it can cause these tics. What is it called? Tardive dyskinesia, I think. And my wife knew somebody that had that. She was medicated in the 60s, I think, before they really knew about these lifelong side effects. And so my wife had worked with a lady who was very impaired. And so she knew, okay, we don't want this long-term for Jude. But it worked so well, we thought, well, I guess we have a certain amount of time with this med, and then we'll take him off of it. But you didn't know what was going to be next, what was going to work next. And so we were continuing to have kids at that point. Our fifth born, Esther, was born in 2017. And in 2018, we found out we were pregnant with our sixth. That pregnancy was like a lot of the others. But during the pregnancy, we found out that the baby had some pretty major defects. There was a heart defect, and there was a bowel, an abdominal defect that was going to require surgery, and surgery soon after the baby was born. And the doctor told us these two defects are very commonly associated with Down syndrome. So, do you guys want to do a test to find out if your baby has Down syndrome? And of course, we didn't want to do a test. We thought God's going to make this baby just like He wants her to be. We knew it was a her, and she ended up having Down syndrome, little Mabel Jane. And whenever she was born, she had to have immediate surgery on her abdomen. Leading up to her birth, she was such a high-risk pregnancy that my wife had to be near a hospital in Dallas. And so my wife stayed at the Ronald McDonald House in Dallas leading up to the delivery for, let's see, I've got it written down here. I've got some notes. She was, for a few weeks leading up to the birth. Mabel was born. She had to be taken over to a nearby pediatric hospital. They had to do surgery on her, and then they in the first 3 days, her third day of life, she had to have heart surgery because she was missing the wall that separates the two chambers of her heart. They had to basically build a wall in there out of fabric and whatever they build it with, and it's terrifying. So that was another just crazy journey that we went on. She was in the hospital for, let's see, I think I maybe have it written down. She was in the hospital for 7 weeks. And so my wife was there with her. Us being separated was just super hard. I had to be home with Jude to try to keep him on schedule. And because he was so hard to handle, we couldn't leave him with any child care. Even though my father-in-law was really good with him, we just were uncomfortable leaving him with somebody for, overnight, especially multiple nights. So our family was split up. We had a lot of help by people taking the other kids. There was just a lot of moving parts, right, to getting kids taken care of and getting people where they needed to be. We were very worried about bringing the baby home because Jude liked to just mess with things a lot. And the baby was coming home with a feeding tube, which, there was a pump on a pole. There was, the whole thing about, putting the milk in bags. Was he going to pull out her feeding tube? Was he going to mess with the equipment? Was this going to be a problem? Major concerns with that. And we were always having to monitor that. So that was 2019 when she was born. And later that year, we started the process of adopting. It has always been on my wife's heart to adopt, and we prayed about it. And she had found the profile of a girl who lived overseas who needed to be adopted, and we prayed about it and just felt led to adopt. So we started the process of the adoption in 2019. And then 2020 rolls around. You probably all remember the year 2020. That was a crazy year. When COVID really became a thing in early 2020, it started out being just something that we, were hearing about on the news. It seemed very, very distant. Even sometimes seemed like a joke. There was a lot of, it was being made light of. And we didn't really think a whole lot of it. We'd even gotten a letter from the school saying that they didn't think it was an issue, that they weren't going to cancel school for it, because that was definitely a concern. And canceling school for my son and for our family would have been just a nightmare, right? So we get to spring break, and spring break's hard. It's always hard. It's not as hard as summer break, but it's still a week-long break from school. My son is just upset. Why am I home? Why am I not at school? That's how he's acting. He's asking for school, and we're just trying to make it through. We're just trying to keep activities going, keep his time filled. On the second or third day, I think, of spring break, or maybe that Thursday, we get a call from the school. They were going to shut down the school for 2 weeks, for 2 more weeks. And that was the 2 weeks to flatten the curve thing. And of course, we all know that didn't just last for 2 weeks, but that got extended. So that was that was an awful realization that he's going to be out of school for 2 weeks. Then they extended it, and the thought of he's going to be out of school indefinitely entered my mind. And I thought, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Because he definitely did not want to be out of school. And the other part of that is I couldn't work as long as he's at home during the day. I worked at the school so I could be at home when he's at home. Now he's at home indefinitely. I was out of PTO at my job. I'm sure a lot of you parents can relate to this. Just using all that up for random things, meltdowns that you have to go home for, whatever. I was out of PTO. And there was no amount of PTO that was going to get me through this indefinite school closure. So thankfully, my department at school agreed to let me work at night. So the only way I could get some hours in was wait until Jude was asleep and make sure he's asleep, and then go to work, right? So try to get some hours in. So I was exhausted because he was still going to bed at the same time and waking up about the same time. So I would work a few hours. I don't think I ever got 8 hours overnight, but I would work and then go home, get some sleep, and then he's waking up. And when he wakes up, I've got to be up because he might just get a whim, an idea in his head that he wants to mess with something. He may be in a bad mood. He may feel bad. I've got to be on him, right? So that was an exhausting time. I don't know how other people and families like us survived that time in life. If you're listening or watching on a platform that has comments, tell me in the comments, how did you guys survive in the year of 2020? Please let me know. They did end up starting school again in the fall. I'm not sure when it was in the fall, but there was all these rules, of course, about masks, right? My son's not going to wear a mask. So many kids out there with sensory processing issues, they're not going to wear a mask all day. Some of the kids would, but there's no way my son's going to wear a mask. So immediately he's breaking the rules, right? There was this list that the school had made of, signs that you may be coming down with COVID. So if you hit any of these signs, stay home from school. And it's the whole, you get to come back to school when you have a negative COVID test or it's been 10 days. Well, my son, like I said, he had a lot of behaviors that were obsessive, compulsive, and at that time, he had gotten into this thing where he would gag himself. He would put his fingers in his mouth, and he would sometimes make himself throw up. So on the list of things that was a possible sign of COVID was vomiting, was throwing up. So he would make himself throw up at school. And so they would call me and say, hey, Jude's vomited, he needs to either get a COVID test or we need to, not see him for 10 days. And I would say, did he make himself throw up? Well, we don't really know. He nobody really saw it. And I thought he was doing that at that time. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's making himself throw up. He's not sick. But there's no way around that, right? I mean, as you know, there were so many rock solid protocols that they were going by. And so I would have to take him home. Well, the only COVID test at that time was the nose swab. And whenever I say swab, I mean they stick that thing to your brain. I don't know if any of you ever got those tests. I got a couple, and they were terrible. There was no way my son was gonna sit for one of those. We tried one time, and even at that point, they weren't that common. You couldn't really just go down to, any old, CVS or clinic and get a COVID test. They were actually rationing those, or they weren't super available. So if Jude threw up at school, it was like we were back, in this nightmare of him not being able to go to school for 10 days. It was a terrible time. Terrible time. There was uncertainty about the adoption. This was an overseas adoption, and the world pretty much shut down. And if you think about all of the paperwork that has to go through government offices and adoption agencies and things like that, all of that came to a halt. It was still moving, but it was at a snail's pace. But the biggest hurdle we thought was going to be these countries shutting down travel. I mean, there was travel being shut down from many, many countries. And so we thought, well, are we even going to be able to go visit, or would she even be able to go over? I mean, fly over to us? Is there going to be any way that this will ever happen? So there's a lot of uncertainty about the adoption, and we were not able to go visit her. They did set us up with Skype, and we were able to visit that way. But as you know, that's not ideal in that situation. Like I said, we had some funding available to us through the state for attendant hours, and so I would theoretically be able to go back to work. We were able to hire attendants to be with him, and that was a huge help. But finding the right people is hard. Finding people who are able to deal with extreme behaviors, things like this, it's just not a very common thing. So we were having a really hard time, and things still weren't working with that. There were often times that I would have to come home from work. Some of the worst parts about his behaviors were there would be so many times that he would be trying to run away from me, and maybe to a dangerous situation. And so I was trying to hold on to him to keep him safe, and then he would start attacking me physically, hitting, kicking, biting, punching. And so it's the juxtaposition of holding on to your attacker for dear life it was more than my mind could handle. And so for us to try to get an attendant that could do that or would be willing to do that, it was just mind-boggling trying to go through that process. So, that wasn't working too well. The local LIDA, we had gotten in contact with them. My wife, by the way, during all this, she did so much research into all of the programs, any help we could get through the state. She was speaking at so many ABA therapy clinics, just places to get some help. And so she was in contact with our LIDA, which LIDA stands for your local intellectual and developmental authority. They're basically the people who can put you in contact with help, right? They can get you the phone number for a program that helps kids like ours, things like that. So she had been talking to them, and she had thought about the future and his adult life, his care whenever we're gone, things like that. And so she'd been involved in touch with the LIDA to try to get him on the HCS waiver list, right? And so, which means basically he would be eligible to go into a group home paid for by the state at some point. And so that wait list, as a lot of you know, is years long, right? We were told, the HCS wait list is 10 to 15 years long, and we're thinking, what, things are getting really hard here. How do we deal with this? And so, my wife finally got a representative from the LIDA to come out one day and observe him because things had gotten so bad. And whenever the employee showed up that day, I just happened to be having a really hard time with Jude. He was attacking me in our yard, being very aggressive and loud and just, out of control. And so the man steps out of his car and he observes and he says, "Yeah, you guys are in crisis. You guys are really, really bad off." And we're like, "Yes, we are." He says, "You guys are going to qualify for the crisis diversion slot." We're like, "What is that?" Well, it basically means you get to jump the line, this HCS line that's 10 to 15 years long. You guys get to jump the line and you get to have help now. And we're thinking, we were never told about this, right? They don't just tell you about all these options, but I guess they want to make sure that you're truly in crisis. So we got the crisis diversion slot, and things were in process for help with that, but there's still not day programs, therapy places, or any programs that will accept a person like him with such extreme behaviors. So we were still trying to figure out what's going on. What kind of help can we get? We had become such a menace, I would say, to our neighborhood. He was very, very often running to neighbors' houses, and he wanted to be at houses where there were kids, but he didn't know how to appropriately, relate to kids or anybody, and so we were becoming problematic in the neighborhood. And I look back and I think about so many times that I did allow him to go to houses, and we would stay in the yard, we would hang out, around the house. He'd be trying to get in the house or trying to get in a garage or a shop, and trying to keep him away from the property completely would be just a knockdown, drag-out fight. And he was getting bigger and stronger. So we would go on a lot of walks, and we would walk by a lot of neighborhood houses. And looking back, I realized that I was overstaying our welcome, honestly, and I was probably, trampling on the good graces of our neighbors and really taking advantage of that. And at the time, I didn't see that, and I just thought, I'm in emergency mode every day, So if I can appease him by us going on a walk and walking by somebody's house, even though maybe we're pacing or we're going around the house, I thought, this is better than like him trying to get in the house. But looking back, I could see a lot more clearly that we were not doing, great by our neighbors. And so it had finally gotten so bad that we had to sell our house. We loved the house. The house had so many personal touches in it. My father-in-law, he had done so much of the work. He had, been our builder, and he had done so much work. And there were so many little fingerprints of his in the house, so many touches. And so we loved the house. Jude loved the house. It was just a very, very tough decision, but we knew we had to get out of there. And at the same time, my father-in-law, who was a huge help with Jude, he was one of the other people who could really actually handle Jude. He got sick with COVID, and he didn't kick it. He ended up going into the hospital, and he was on the ventilator, and he had many strokes, and he ended up passing away in October of 2020. October 31st, 2020 is when he passed away. At that time, we had sold our house. We were living in a rent house, and that was a terrible time. Those were dark days in our life. Our kids hated the house. Jude was very hard to handle in the house. It was off of the highway, which was our goal, away from a neighborhood, which was our goal. And that limits your options a lot. But this house had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and it really caused regression in Jude as far as toileting goes and as far as bathing goes. He liked to take baths, and this house had a shower. So we were doing porch baths, with warm water, just trying to get him clean. He was still not toilet trained. He had been toilet trained. He regressed in that. We're having trouble with that. And then my father-in-law passes away. And my father-in-law was sort of like the hero to his kids, to his family. He was kind of like the guy who could do no wrong, and he could do anything. And so it was a major blow. It was a major blow to Jude. Jude loved Bob. Jude and Bob were tight, and Jude trusted Bob. He knew Bob so well. Bob did very, very good with Jude, and so it was just a huge, hole left in our family. My mother-in-law, we were really needing to support her at this time, and we ended up moving back in with her. She lived kind of next door to us, So we ended up back in the old neighborhood, which brought more fear. How's this going to work? What are we going to do? But my mother-in-law, she needed us, and my wife especially, and so we wanted our family to be together. So we moved back into the neighborhood. And strangely, it worked. It worked pretty well. We didn't have trouble with Jude trying to run over to neighbors' houses during that time. So but it was just still a fear. It's just still we're in constant fear mode and worry mode, and there's just trauma from our daily life with him. So that was a really dark time. I remember one time we had family over, and he had a pretty bad episode. Had a meltdown that resulted in him, coming after me aggressively, and trying to hurt me pretty badly. We ended up in the yard. I had to take him out of the house, and we decided to take him to the ER because we had heard that people do that sometimes. Sometimes they can help. Sometimes, you're just so desperate you don't know what to do, and so we had been thinking pretty heavily at that time that he may not be able to live with us. And what does that look like? What does that mean? That's a thought that you don't want to think, but a thought that it's just a very obvious conclusion to the direction that he's going. The meds aren't really working. We tried so many different meds. We've tried medical marijuana or the CBD oil with THC, right? The heavy duty stuff that you have to get, major approval for. We tried all that. Nothing was working. Things would work, but he would be like sedated, and then other times he would still be difficult. So at this time, we had heard about sometimes people being able to find a placement, taking their child to the emergency room. And this one particular fight was so bad that we took him to the ER. And he had been beating me up so badly. And there's that. And then once we got him in the car, which he got in the car fine, we said, let's go on a ride. He'd like to go on a ride. The thought hit me, we may be sending him somewhere. And so I was just getting over being beaten up in the yard, sweaty. I was bleeding. I was dirty. I mean, he had me on the ground. And then the thought of, Jude may be going to live somewhere else, maybe today, So I just remember crying just on the way there. I mean, my wife drove and, because I was going to sit next to Jude, make sure he didn't do anything dangerous in the car. And we're going to the ER, and I'm thinking, this may be it. Like, he may be going somewhere. And as much as you get beat on, and as much as your life is just torn apart and you're traumatized, you still love your son, and you still don't want to send your son off to go live somewhere else. I remember showing up, talking to them about it, and we stayed for quite a while. They had called several facilities in Texas, several residential schools and facilities, therapy clinics, things like that. And my wife had called a couple, and one after one, we learned that there's not a place in Texas that takes kids like him that have extreme behaviors, and he doesn't have his ADLs mastered, his activities of daily living, right? He can't go to the bathroom on his own. He can't go to the bathroom and clean himself, by himself. He really can't bathe himself, things like that. And we just slowly realized there's no help for us. There's nothing, and we just feel dejected. But on the other hand, we don't want to send him somewhere. And at the end of that long night, we're all just exhausted. He's exhausted, and we just end up going home. So you go from this place where you're in this extreme situation, you're getting beat on, you don't feel like your family's safe, you don't feel like your child is safe, needing to do something, needing to take action, but then that action causes sorrow and just super sad emotions. And then at the end of that night, you just go home because there's no answer. Just the emotional roller coaster was crazy. So we make it through the year 2020. He's back in school. Things are somewhat settled, back into our normal routine, which it doesn't seem very normal, but it's our normal. And my wife and I find out that we're pregnant with will be our seventh child. And our seventh child is born July 2021. We're still living with my mother-in-law. The house is obviously not big enough for us all. But at that time, we had started the process of building. We had planned on building a place in a more remote location where we could be on some land, not really worry about him being in a neighborhood. And those plans got put on hold because my mother-in-law and father-in-law, they were going to build next to us. And obviously their plans drastically changed. Life changed for them. And so we're still living with her at this point. And so, my son Jude, he's sleeping on the couch. He likes to sleep on the couch, but it just seems like we are in a bad situation and we're cramped in this place. We just had a newborn, and that birth ends up being an emergency C-section because my wife, her body just was not moving along with the delivery. And during that, an artery was cut, one of my wife's arteries, and she started to lose blood. And things got really, really serious. It's one of those times where there's going to be a C-section. There's a doctor, a couple of nurses, an anesthesiologist, and then things get really serious. Whenever people start flooding into the room and everybody's tone changes, the doctor curses, you start to worry. You start to panic. All of the thoughts start going through your head. Is my baby okay? They got the baby out. The baby was fine. Is my wife going to be okay? She was losing blood. Color was leaving her face. She was getting sleepy. She was starting to tell me her goodbyes. She thought she was going to die. And it was a nightmare. Again, I thought she was going to die. And I was going to have the loss of a wife, and then the situation with all the kids that we have, and they're not going to have a mother. And so it was just, we obviously we prayed a lot. We called out to God a lot. She had to take 6 units of blood, but the doctor got her sewed up and saved her life. And so we knew she was going to live. She was going to be okay, but there was some collateral damage from the surgery. Kidney stuff, a ureter had been sewn up or something. And so her recovery was not short. Her recovery was quite a while. And so she was in pain. She was not knowing how she was going to, end up recovering, if she was going to fully recover. So we're dealing with a newborn baby who thankfully was healthy. But a newborn baby is a lot of work still. We're dealing with her recovery, her not really knowing if she's going to fully recover. She's in pain. She's worried about all that. And then we have my oldest son, who is just incredibly difficult to handle. We don't know what's going to happen with him. We began talks with our LIDA about options for him, and the option was the State-Supported Living Center. We didn't really know anything about the State-Supported Living Center other than it's an institutional state school type of place, and we didn't want our son to live there. But we had no other option. It's just this is so unsustainable. He was a risk to himself, a danger to himself, a danger to me, my wife. He had started to point his aggression towards our kids at times. There were getting to be more and more instances where he would get upset and start getting aggressive, and my wife would take the other kids and go lock them in a room, herself and the kids in a room, just to be safe. And there were times when he was coming at that room, and we just didn't know what was going to happen. The house was dangerous, right? The house was dangerous, and he was getting bigger and older, and so we started talks about the state supported living center, and we ended up getting a date set, a date for him to go live there. And this is again a thought that you just don't want to have. This is a thought that you know is the best thing, but you're in denial about it. And then there's a date that's far out there, and you just try not to think about it. You just don't think about it because you just almost can't bring yourself to think about it. But then you know this is not sustainable. We can't keep living. We can't keep him here, keep him safe and us safe. It's heartbreaking. So during this time, the adoption process rolls on, and it actually becomes finalized. And my wife goes to get our adopted daughter from a European country a few days before Christmas. And so, this is just difficult. This is us finding the time to go do this. For one of us to go do this was just unheard of. Honestly, it was just like impossible. So much had changed in the time period that we'd started the adoption, that when it finally came time for it to be finalized, we thought, how are we going to do this? How are we going to pull this off? But we just do it. We book the flights. My wife and daughter and my wife's brother go to pick this girl up. And so this girl, she gets brought home, and she's in America, close to Christmas time. So we're trying to learn her, trying to help her feel assimilated to our family. She got a pretty wild family, but we're getting ready for Christmas. We have Christmas, just dealing with issues with my son, dealing with issues with our adopted daughter. Things are different. She's had a really, really traumatic upbringing, so there's always things with that. We get to New Year's Eve, 2021. We go to my parents' house and have some fireworks, have a good celebration. Things are great. We come home, and I needed to do some work. I had actually changed jobs at this point. We had our own company. We were building houses because that gave me the flexibility to not have to be in an office or at a workplace certain hours. We knew that was going to be necessary, so we did that in 2020. But that also meant that we had projects we had to get done. So this was during a holiday, and I was having to work after Jude was in bed. So New Year's Eve is just like any other night. Any other night, I needed to work. So I had to unload some things from my truck into a barn. So close to midnight, I go out and I'm unloading. I think it was boxes of flooring. I'm going to my truck, going to the barn. I had stepped up into the barn and down out of the barn, at least 20 times. And on the last time I stepped out of the barn, I guess I stepped over a little farther to the left than I had been, and I stepped into a hole and broke my leg. I heard something snap, and the support went out from under me, and I went to the ground. And I immediately thought, sorry, I got bugs. I immediately thought, what are we going to do with Jude? Who's going to take care of Jude? Because I was the main caretaker. I was the only one who was strong enough to handle him. And this was like another worst nightmare, because we had been talking about what's going to happen if I get hurt. I was 40 at that time. Sorry, I was 41 at that time, not getting any younger. My knees were hurting me. I was starting to not just feel young. And I thought, we had talked about it. I thought, what if I get hurt? What if my knee gets injured? What if Jude kicks one of my knees or something? He was so strong, I thought, I would be down for the count. Who would take care of Jude? Well, I broke my leg. I went into the house. I hobbled into the house, woke my wife up and said, I think I broke my leg. And she said, oh my gosh, are you serious? What are we going to do? And I said, I don't know. She said, well, can you put weight on it? Maybe you just sprained it. And I said, okay, so I could put weight on it, but it was extremely painful. So I went on to the ER and found out, no, it's definitely broken. So there we were in another one of our worst nightmares, where I was not going to be able to physically handle Jude. He was 12, and I thought, what are we going to do? His date to go to the state supported living center was not for a few months. So I came home at about 5 a.m. the next morning. My wife gets up, the kids get up, Jude gets up, and she says, I'm going to have to handle him. I'm going to have to try to handle him. She calls a teacher friend who has handled him before, done so good with him in class, called a couple of teachers' aides that we had become really good friends with. They had helped us with childcare and things. They had helped us with him throughout the years. And they came over, and we just realized this is not sustainable. He was going to hurt my wife. He had her up against the wall at some point. He was being very rough with her. And we were not going to be able to get enough support there every day until I recovered. And she said, I've got to take him somewhere. I've heard that if you take him to the state hospital that's a couple hours away, I've heard people say that one of the only ways to get in is to just show up. And that if your case is extreme enough, they'll take the child or the person. And so she packed him some clothes, said, Jude, let's go on a ride. And took him on a ride, took him to the state hospital 2.5 hours away, maybe 2 hours away. They got seen by some staff there, a doctor, some different people, and they said, yeah, you're in grave need. Your family's in danger with him. He's in danger. He can stay here. And so my wife said goodbye to him and said, I'm going to be back. Jude, you need to stay here for a while Daddy gets better. And he went with the doctor. And for the first time ever, my wife saw him walk through some doors, and she got out of the car and she came home without him. And just, again, the emotional roller coaster is wild because there's relief there, right? Because she could get in the car and not worry about him jumping out like he's done other times. She didn't have to worry about him jumping up to the front, hitting the gear shift or hitting the steering wheel. There was relief there for that. But then there's this immense sadness that she just took her son to a place and dropped him off. We didn't know how long he was going to be able to be there. We didn't know about the place. We didn't know really how they handled kids. I mean, we had heard some things, but you just go through all of the scenarios. Is my child safe? Is he going to be able to make it there? So he was there for a few months. He turned 12 there, I believe. And then for some reason, his date got changed to go to the state supported living center because he went to the state hospital. And I have no idea why, but he was delayed going to the state supported living center for some reason. That's state stuff for you. I don't know, but so he went to the state supported living center. And, I do want to say this. It was incredibly difficult. But God has given us hope throughout the whole thing. God has given us hope. My wife and I have prayed, but my wife especially, she has been impressed to pray for wherever he's at, whether it be public school, whether it be at the state hospital, whether it be at the state supported living center. She just felt led to pray, God, send somebody to be with my son that will love him like me, that will love him like their own. And God has provided that throughout his years in the public school. He provided that at the state hospital. He provided that at the state supported living center. And it's just incredible just to see God work those things out, because there are so many hours that we don't know, what is he doing? He's unaccounted for in our mind. Is he okay? Is he giving them trouble? Are they telling us the whole story about, his behaviors and all that? It's just incredibly hard, but God gave us hope throughout. He gave us people who were with him that were Christians, that were incredibly caring to him, people that would say things like, he's like my own son. I love him like my own. And so we are just incredibly grateful to God for that. He's been faithful to us, even throughout, just throughout the emotional roller coaster of my son's childhood. Then it came time for us to talk about home visits, because the State Supported Living Center will allow home visits. They'll allow family to come up and visit him, and they'll allow you to take your loved one home for a certain amount of time. And my wife was obviously saying we need to bring him home for a home visit, and I know he needs to be around his family. He needs to have a relationship with his siblings, with his parents. But the trauma had affected me so badly that I was scared to death. And so we would do home visits, and the early ones were successful. We bring him home for a 24-hour stint. It was odd bringing him back, but he did well. And throughout his time, throughout his whole life, we've had med changes. Just the whole med journey is just crazy because things stop working and things, there's concerns about things. So a med change would happen, and then the next home visit would be not so good. We'd have issues. In that meantime, we'd actually been able to buy our house back, which was wild. That's a long story, but we were able to bring him home for home visits to his house. And we had some bad ones. We've had some rough ones, and that in and of itself has just there's stories for another time there. But lately, he's been doing so well. We've been able to bring him home consistently, and he's been doing so well. It's so encouraging, and they've been able to reduce his supervision there. He's making so much progress there. So God has been so good to him. He's been so good to us that's been a good experience. And I just want to tell you, there is hope. There is hope for change. It may not look like it. It didn't look like it in my mind for a long time. I just thought, this is our life. And the main thing that got me down was I thought, nobody deals with this. That was a lie that I believed. I thought to myself, first of all, people don't know what we're going through because it just doesn't come up in conversation, right? You don't go to places and somebody's talking about their kid. Oh, hey, so and so got the honor roll, or was played in this sport this weekend, and it comes to you and you go like, yeah, man, my kid, bloodied my arm and gave me this scar and we almost lost him. It doesn't feel good to bring up things going on with your child when you have an extreme child. And so I wouldn't bring things up. People didn't know the severity of it. We felt very alone. Even family, close friends, they didn't know how bad it was at home. And so that felt very isolating. We just felt alone. We felt like nobody's dealing with this. Nobody in the world is dealing with a child like we have. And we thought that because people don't talk about it. People don't feel like they can talk about it. And so nobody's speaking out about it. And, we just felt alone. It wasn't until my wife started really speaking out a lot more about it on social media that she started to have people message her. People were coming out of the woodwork, these moms saying, we're in the same boat. We're going down the same path, or asking for help. How do we get help for our child? And I started to realize there are a lot of families like ours. We're not alone. There are so many families like ours. There are so many moms talking to my wife. And I thought, how many dads are out there in the same boat as me thinking, there's nobody like this. There's nobody dealing with anything like this. We're alone. What are we going to do, right? So that's why I'm wanting to do this. I want to continue telling my story. I want to have guests on, things like that. I want to encourage dads. And you know what? You can be encouraged by going to my wife's social media accounts. She's on Facebook, Instagram. She is at Special Needs Motherhood. Her Instagram handle is just Special Needs Motherhood. So go check her out. She has done some posts with our son, some video of him at the State Supported Living Center. She's gotten a lot of hate because of a lot of the videos that she shows my son, and she shows daily things going on with him but she wants to be transparent. She wants to be real about it and tell people what's really going on. I think it's important. And so please subscribe, whatever platform you're watching or listening to this on. Please subscribe, follow me, comment, share this. If you know a family or a person that needs to be encouraged, needs to hear this, please share this. And let me know what you think in the comments. Please talk about what's going on with your child in the comments. I'd love to hear it. So thanks for joining me. I know that this was awkward. This is my first time recording in a while, and it's called the Awkward Dadcast for a reason. There's going to be awkward moments. I think there's been flies flying around. I'm not the best speaker, things like that. So, but hey, it's real. It's awkward. It's all good. See you later.